You are stronger, you are greater. Nothing I face could ever separate me. Your love is wonder, your name is splendor. Nothing could change the love you have displayed for me. My God has come to save, your power has no end. You are my shield and strength, you show me who I am. My God has come to stay, your love will never end. You've overcome the grave, you are the great I am. I won't tremble.
Hello and welcome to the online service of First Christian Church in San Marcos, Texas. I'm Senior Pastor Gregory Ross. We're very happy that you've joined us for this message. We're recording in the fall of 2022, and I've been doing a series on the topic "Never Give Up," which is a biblical and a Christian virtue and concept. So we want to never give up on God. Jesus in Luke 18 tells a parable to the end that people may always pray and never give up. Never give up on God. Never give up on one another. We're taught in Galatians chapters 5 and 6 to bear one another's burdens and to not grow weary in doing good. For if we will be patient, in due time we will reap a great harvest. And so our rewards sometimes are not immediate gratification, but with patience over time, God blesses us, and we can look back and see His hand in our life and in our plans. And then I also want to say, never give up on yourself. Jesus in Matthew chapter 10 has to be smiling as He looks upon people who are desperate and sometimes discouraged, and He says, "Take heart." He said, "You know, God sees every sparrow that falls to the earth, and you are worth more than many sparrows." And so He says in Matthew chapter 6, not to be anxious about anything, about your life, what you shall eat, what you shall wear, how long you shall live, what's going to happen tomorrow. But seek first God's kingdom. Be with God. Be in His realm, and God, who sees what we need before we ask, is able to take care of us. That doesn't mean we don't. We're not exempt because of our faith in God. We're not exempt from all of the human circumstances that everybody faces. Hardships come. If you haven't had any hardships, brace yourself. You will. And if you've gotten through them, I hope that it's made you stronger in your faith and strengthened your character, because you realize that you can do this. Even if you don't know how this is going to come out, God is with us. So never give up. That's the point of what we're talking about. In the letter of James, in the New Testament, James, the brother of the Lord, wrote a letter that's now subdivided into 5 chapters. It's not a very long one. And he has amazing things to say, and it's one of the best commentaries on Jesus' Sermon on the Mount that's found in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. But James is a letter about perseverance. He's teaching us how to deal with our problems and how to get through them without giving up. In the 5th chapter of James, he says, when you're suffering, remember the prophets and remember the patience of Job, how he suffered through no fault of his own. He was innocent. He didn't do something to deserve the suffering, and yet he got through that. And so we had a message previously where I talked about the patience of Job and what we can learn from that. Now, what we get from Job is we never quite understand the reason for suffering. We live in a world that is hard. We live in a world where we are told, and James tells us, and the book of Job basically says, it's not God who causes the suffering, but God is with us when we do. I am a believer, of course, in Jesus. I'm a Christian. I'm a pastor of a church. And I've looked at the teachings and the life of Jesus to see if there's some way to explain innocent suffering. And really, I don't see any. I see that Jesus Himself experienced innocent suffering, and He stands for us when He cries out, "God, why have you forsaken me?" When God really hasn't forsaken us. God is in Jesus on the cross, and that's a great encouragement to me. I don't have an answer for why. When Job gets his day in court, in the story of Job, which I think is written kind of like it's a great poem, it's a play, but it's based on a historical figure. But Job finally gets to address God and say, "Why is all this happening to me? Because I don't think I've done anything to deserve it." God says, he says, "It's beyond your comprehension, Job. Life is more complicated than you think. And were you there when I created the universe, formed the seasons, created life, created all of these things that you see. No, you weren't there. You didn't pull up alongside, with a camping trailer and watch me do all this. You don't understand any of this. I can't explain this to you. What I want you to do is trust me. But you have integrity and you do have faith. And so I'm going to make this right for you. And that's the end of that story. That's Job. So I want to talk today about another of the prophets. The Hebrew writer in the New Testament says, look to the prophets for examples of faith. And so we're doing that. When James talks about innocent suffering, he tells us to look to the innocent suffering of Job, and he says, and the other prophets who also suffered for doing good. The modern maxim, no good deed will go unpunished, is certainly true of the ancient prophets in the Hebrew Scriptures. And we can learn from that, because that doesn't mean something's wrong. Doesn't mean you did something wrong. You probably did something right, and somebody who doesn't like it caused some problems. In the early church, when Christians found that their faith in Jesus Christ changed their whole world, made them have better relationships, taught them to love even their enemies, for all of the goodness, for the way that their lives were drastically changed. Their lifestyle was so different now. They went from taking care of only themselves and exploiting others to now serving others and learning how to turn the other cheek and go the extra mile, as Jesus teaches us. For that, they are persecuted. Because if you're in business with a corrupt guy and you decide to change your life and be honest, he's not going to be happy with your new business practices. And he's going to be very unhappy about that and push you out. So those are the kinds of experiences that the early Christians were having, and they were being told, hang on, God is with you. This is going to turn out well, and eternity is at stake. So it's a great thing. I'm wanting to talk about Jeremiah this morning. I'm not going to have time to tell you much about it. This is a 52-chapter book. It's one of the 5 major prophets in the Old Testament. Isaiah, Jeremiah, and then a little 5-chapter book, probably written by Jeremiah, certainly about his experience of the destruction of Jerusalem in Judah in ancient times. And Jeremiah is called by God to warn people that they've got to change their ways, and they've got to stop mistreating one another and other people, and they've got to be faithful to his covenant, or they're really going to be destroyed for their wickedness. And so Jeremiah I want to talk about, because it introduces two things that are true in human life. One is innocent suffering. And in Jeremiah, you see innocent suffering. You see him warning people about impending doom, and for that, he is severely persecuted. Innocent suffering. He hasn't done something wrong. He is called by some commentators the reluctant prophet. He doesn't want to tell these people these things, and it's not a popular message that he gives for 40 years. And yet, he's persecuted for that. So innocent suffering is something you have to look at here and decide if it's worth it. And for Jeremiah, it's worth it. And it's a good inspiration for us. The other thing is, sometimes what we suffer is something we do deserve. In other words, if you make bad decisions in your life, if you become addicted to a substance that will destroy your health and your relationships in your life, perhaps you are responsible to some extent for the outcome and the consequences of your own behavior. Now, I want you to remember, we're saying never give up on yourself. So I'm not trying to make a judgment here. I'm just trying to make an illustration that sometimes we make bad choices. We all do. And sometimes those bad choices can have severe consequences that are harmful to us and to those who love us. So sometimes that is what's going on in our world. If you see your child playing near the road and the cars are rushing by and you say, don't go into the road, and the child jumps out to catch a ball and is hit by a car, they made a bad choice. I'd want to say also that that's probably innocent suffering, not deserved suffering. but there are consequences to our behavior, and sometimes we suffer for it. In the days of Jeremiah, Jeremiah was called to be a prophet and to warn people of impending doom. He preaches, prophesies for 40 years saying, don't do what you're doing. Your wickedness is not going unheeded because there are innocent people suffering at your hands. Those of you who are leaders, those of you who are false prophets, those of you who are wicked and selfish, powerful kings. And Jeremiah lived through 5 kings of Judah. And he's saying, because of all that you're doing, you're hurting people, and their cries are going out to God, and he's hearing them, and you will not be able to continue this way without consequences. So, in Jeremiah's time, he is persecuted for trying to do what is good and warn people of impending doom. People in Judah are suffering, exploited at the hands of those in power who are greedy and selfish and wicked. Do you know they had ceased their covenant with God, still giving lip service to it, but their hearts had gone far from God. They had the temple in Jerusalem. They thought, well, God's here with us because the temple's still there, and it's a beautiful temple that the Babylonians come in and finally utterly destroy. But they begin to follow after pagan gods and to offer human sacrifice, even burning their own children on the altar of pagan idols. Terrible things that they're doing. Their sexual immorality is boundless. I mean, they have no conscience. They have no responsibility for relationships. They exploit one another terribly. And this goes on. I mean, they exploit the poor and the needy. They take advantage of them, and they have no concern or compassion for their suffering. Those are the circumstances in Jeremiah's life. And for 40 years, he preaches, and as far as I can tell, in the 52 chapters that are the book of Jeremiah and Lamentations, and also from the book of Kings, which probably was authored in some part by Jeremiah, among others. You see in all of these writings that people did not heed what God called him to preach about, and he did not win converts. You talk about an unsuccessful prophet, 40 years of preaching, and nobody accepts what he's saying. Nobody, not any of the kings, except for Baruch, who was his editor and secretary, who kept his documents. One king destroyed all of his writings and prophecies that had been recorded, and he had to rewrite them. If you read the book of Jeremiah, and I encourage you to do so, if you read the book of Jeremiah, it's a long book in the Old Testament, 52 chapters. And it's not in chronological order so far as commentators are able to determine, because these are the things he said repeatedly over the years, and at some point he writes them down. Some things refer to earlier periods in his life and some to later. So some of these things that are early, that warn of destruction, may be scattered throughout the book because he's putting these different visions and prophecies together and writing them at different times. And some of the hope that he gives after they have been destroyed probably comes later, even though some of those writings occur earlier in the book. It's not a chronological order. Difficult to read, but eminently worthwhile, and I encourage you to do so. I would say, if you want a place to whet your appetite on Jeremiah, is read Lamentations. It's 5 chapters, and it's why he's earned the epithet, the weeping prophet. He is brokenhearted at his people's misbehavior and their final destruction and their awful suffering. And in those 5 chapters, you see him weeping for his people and identifying with them in his grief for them, because God himself is brokenhearted. And you see in Jeremiah the brokenheartedness of God as he warns, and in anger he threatens people, you're going to pay for this. You can't continue to hurt one another and nothing happened. You will have consequences. You have to change, and they don't change. So there are 200, I counted these, I see 207 either direct quotes or allusions to the writings of the book of Jeremiah in the New Testament. That's a lot. Many references to Jeremiah in the New Testament. It's an important writing, a collection of writings for us to understand. And 7 direct quotes from the little letter of Lamentations, where Jeremiah is grieving over the destruction of Judah. God calls Jeremiah when he says, I'm a child, a young man, maybe in his late teens, maybe in his early 20s. I'm not sure how old he was when he died. He was carried off in captivity, really kind of against his will, at the end of his life to Egypt, where he died, we suspect. I don't think he ever was able to return to Judah. And he was at least in his 60s, maybe older when he died. But when God calls him, and he kind of resists it, I don't want to say bad things are going to happen to my people. God says essentially in the first chapter of Jeremiah, get yourself ready, go, be prepared for what I'm going to give you. I'm going to give you. He's a mystic. He's a vision. He's a visionary. He's a prophet. I'm going to give you messages to proclaim to the people. Get yourself ready. Go wherever I send you. Stand up and say whatever I tell you, as hard as that is. And do not be afraid, God says, for I am with you. Doesn't mean you won't suffer, but you will know that I am with you. So never give up. That's our message today. Get yourself ready. Go wherever God sends you. Be true to what His Word says to you. And be a proclaimer of the good things of Jesus Christ. Do not be afraid, for God is with you. Those are the things you have to know. I think I'm just going to say that he was active as a prophet from the 13th century. The 13th year of Josiah, king of Judah. So he starts his ministry about 626 BC, and his prophetic message to Judah ends with the destruction of Jerusalem in 587 BC, the destruction of the temple, the fall of Jerusalem, and his period of prophesying spans the reign of 5 kings of Judah. Josiah, a good king. He starts in the middle of Josiah's reign, and then 4 very terrible kings, and so he proclaims the destruction of Judah from invaders of the north, the Babylonians, because Israel had forsaken God by worshiping the idols of Baal, burning their children as offerings, doing horrible things to helpless people who are poor and innocent and needy. They deviated from the moral code of the law of Moses. They'd broken his covenant and removed themselves from his blessing. And so as Jeremiah prophesies warnings against them and calling them to repent and change their ways, people plot against him. They try to take his life. They have him beaten. They have him put in stocks. They throw him down into a cistern, like a well, which is muddy at the bottom. He sinks into the mud. And somebody who tries to help him gets him out of there, but he's put in prison again. And he basically stays in prison until the destruction of Jerusalem with the coming of the Babylonians. And he is released by the Babylonians. And they have the documentation that says he warned them not to resist the Babylonians. And so they're actually kind to Jeremiah and offer for him to go to have a place of honor if he'll go back with them to Babylon. He chooses to stay there with the governor that's put in place, Gedaliah, who himself is killed, and then the next governor escapes to Egypt and takes Jeremiah with him. So that's the story of Jeremiah, and it's a terrible story. It's a lot of suffering. Jeremiah struggled with the mission that God gave him. He wanted to see hearts changed, and he grieved his lack of success. But he faithfully carried out God's instructions in the face of unrelenting, decades-long opposition. But he just did not quit. Jeremiah is an amazing example of innocent suffering and one who never gave up, who trusted God. He chose to completely identify himself with the cause of God, and his messages were never very popular. But for over 40 years, he persistently and courageously delivered them. Now listen to Jesus centuries later. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, after giving us the Beatitudes, blessed are those who are these things, he finally says, Matthew 5, verse 11 and 12, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Because of your trust in Jesus, because you're a follower of him, because you've been persecuted, because you want to do good in the face of evil. Jesus says, rejoice and be glad, even when you're suffering innocently, because great is your reward in heaven, for in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. That's absolutely the case with Jeremiah. Listen to just a little bit here of what we get from the record of Jeremiah. In chapter 15 of Jeremiah, verse 18, why is my pain unending? Hear this. Why is my pain unending, and my wound grievous and incurable? Will you be to me like a deceptive brook, like a spring that fails? He says to God, I trust in you, and look what's happening to me. And in Jeremiah 20, verses 7 through 18, I'm going to read just a piece of this. O Lord, you deceived me, and I was deceived. You overpowered me and prevailed. I'm ridiculed all day long. Everyone mocks me. Whenever I speak, I cry out, proclaiming violence and destruction. So the word of the Lord has brought me insult and reproach all day long. But if I say I will not mention God or speak any more in his name, his word is in my heart like a fire shut up in my bones. I'm weary of holding it in. Indeed, I cannot. He has to speak. God's Spirit is urging him to warn people, but it's causing him to be isolated and persecuted and insulted. And he just doesn't understand how that can be allowed. Continue in chapter 20 of Jeremiah. Listen to how bad it gets for him. Verse 14, cursed be the day I was born. Have you ever felt that way? Cursed be the day I was born. May the day my mother bore me not be blessed. Cursed be the man who brought my father the news, who made him very glad, saying, a child is born to you, a son. May that man be like the towns that the Lord overthrew without pity. May he hear wailing in the morning and a battle cry at noon, at the announcement of my birth. For he did not kill me in the womb, with my mother as my grave. How bad does life have to get for you to say, cursed be the day that I was born? He did not kill me in the womb, with my mother as my grave, her womb enlarged forever. Why did I ever come out of the womb to see trouble and sorrow, and to end my days in shame? So Jeremiah struggled with innocent suffering. And he called on people to repent from the wickedness that they had done, because the consequences of their behavior was not going to be innocent suffering, but the result of all of the evil that they'd done to others and to one another. So we have to understand that God sees what's going on in the world. He not only sees, but he cares. He not only cares, but he calls on us who see what's going on in the world to speak out and to act and to do something about it. He gives us the scriptures. He gives us the example of Jeremiah. He gives us encouragement. He tells us to speak up. He says we don't have a choice. That's what we're called to do. I'm going to give you the conclusion, though. I want you to hear some of this. When Jeremiah worries that the evil that's being done by the leaders of his people is going to result in terrible persecution and suffering, he's strong in his message. But when that day comes, then Jeremiah begins to speak a message of encouragement. Listen to what Jeremiah says at the destruction of the temple and the fall of Jerusalem. It's in Jeremiah 29, verse 11. God says, he didn't say, I told you so. What he says is, I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. In Jeremiah 31, in a very famous passage that's quoted in the New Testament, Jeremiah says, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel and with the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, after the destruction of Israel, after the destruction of Judah. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts, and I will be their God. They will be my people, and no longer will they teach their neighbors, saying to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord, for I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. One of my favorite and most encouraging and inspiring words that come out of the teachings and the prophecy of this great prophet Jeremiah is Lamentations 3. I'm beginning in verse 22. The steadfast love of the Lord. In the midst of all of his lamenting the sufferings of the people of Judah, here's what he says. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They're new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Jeremiah never gave up. He's putting his weight on God. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. Now, I usually stop there in my own meditations, and those are the words that are encouraging to me. Lamentations 3, verses 22 through 24. But listen to what he goes on to say in 25 and 26, the next sentences. The Lord is good to those who wait for him. That's our message today, folks. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, who never give up. To the soul that seeks God, it is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation, for the protection, for the care and nourishment of the Lord. That's our message. I'd like to end our meditation today by reciting the prayer that Jesus taught us, the words that will be on the screen. If you're in a place where you can say them aloud with me, please do so. Otherwise, just join me and pray in your heart. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen.
To name.